I'll never forget the sting of humiliation at my sister Sophia's wedding, while others dined beneath chandeliers at lavish tables. My place was a lonely folding chair near the restrooms. Years of sacrifice for her dreams reduced to a quiet corner of shame. I walked out without a word. But that single step shattered the illusion of family loyalty and set me on a path that would change everything forever. I'm Clara Ramirez. I was 32 years old when I finally admitted something I had spent my whole life trying to ignore. On paper, I looked fine. I had a steady job in a research office. I paid my bills on time. And people often described me as kind, dependable, even smart. But none of that ever seemed to matter once I stepped into the same room as my sister. Sophia. Sophia was the golden daughter. She was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she walked in. Tall, beautiful, and perfectly at ease with the world. Growing up, every conversation at the dinner table somehow circled back to her, as if the rest of us existed only to fill the silence between her victories. And me? I was the one who helped everyone. The one who blended into the background. I tried to accept it. To be grateful for the life I had built for myself. But deep down, I always carried that quiet ache, the knowledge that in my family's eyes, I was little more than a shadow. It wasn't envy as much as it was exhaustion. Living in someone's shadow for 3 decades shapes you. It makes you believe that's where you belong. Until one day, you realize it's not. The night of Sophia's wedding was like walking into a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom. Violins played in the corner. And every guest seemed dressed straight off a runway. People laughed easily. Glasses clinked. And the whole place felt soaked in a kind of glow that didn't belong to me. I moved quietly through the crowd, smiling when expected, though I already felt invisible. Near the entrance, a large gold-framed chart displayed everyone's seating assignments. Guests leaned in with excitement, pointing out their names like finding treasure. When my turn came, I scanned the neat rows of elegant calligraphy until I found it Clara Ramirez tucked at the very bottom. I followed the diagram and then looked across the room, expecting a small corner table at least. Instead, I saw it. A single folding chair. Not even a proper seat. Just a metal chair shoved near the restrooms, where the smell of disinfectant drifted every time the door swung open. The laughter from the ballroom seemed to fade as my eyes fixed on that chair. My heart dropped, not from the inconvenience, but from the brutal clarity of what it meant. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a seat. It was about my whole life, 32 years of being the afterthought, the shadow, the one who didn't deserve a real place at the table. And suddenly, I knew something inside me had to change. I worked in a small research office on the north side of the city. It wasn't glamorous. Not the kind of job that made headlines or earned applause at family gatherings. But it was work I cared about. I spent my days buried in data, trying to piece together solutions to problems most people didn't even realize existed. It gave me a sense of purpose. My colleagues respected me. Yet whenever family was involved, that respect seemed to vanish like smoke. To my parents, my job was nice. That was the word they always used. Nice. As if the years I'd poured into school and the countless hours I spent late at night, bent over reports, amounted to little more than a pleasant hobby. They'd smile politely when I mentioned a new project, then quickly turn the conversation toward Sophia. Sophia was everything I wasn't, or at least that's how it felt. She was strikingly beautiful, with a style that made people stare. She had married well, lived in a house that looked like it belonged in a real estate brochure, and she walked into every room as if the air itself shifted to accommodate her. When she spoke, people leaned in closer. When she laughed, everyone else followed. At family dinners, it was almost theatrical. My father would beam with pride as Sophia described her latest business venture or charity event. My mother would hang on every word, her eyes glowing as if Sophia was some sort of miracle. Then, eventually, someone would remember I was there. My role was predictable. I was the one who helped set the table, who picked up dishes, who listened without interrupting. Occasionally, my mother would pat my hand and say, "Clara's always so thoughtful." As though being thoughtful was the consolation prize for not being extraordinary. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me. I repeated the words like a mantra. I'm not jealous. I'm not envious. And it was true. In a way, I didn't want to be Sophia. I didn't crave her spotlight or her picture-perfect life. What I wanted was something far simpler: to be seen. To be valued for who I was instead of dismissed as the dependable background character. But the imbalance lingered in the air. Heavy and undeniable. It showed up in small ways. To like the way my parents' faces lit up when Sophia arrived and softened when she left. While my comings and goings barely registered, it showed up in the way family friends asked about Sophia first. Then politely nodded when I explained what I did for a living. As though they were waiting for the real conversation to begin. Living in that constant comparison wore me down in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. I thought I was being strong by swallowing it, by refusing to let it turn me bitter. But what I was really doing was letting the silence shape me. I became skilled at hiding my disappointment, at convincing myself that kindness was enough, that if I just stayed reliable, someone would notice. The truth, though, was that in my family's story, Sophia was always the headline, and I was just the footnote. I can still remember the night Sophia got her acceptance letter to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. My parents practically lit up the whole neighborhood with their excitement. They threw a party so big that even people who barely knew us showed up. There was champagne, trays of food, and neighbors streaming in with flowers and cards. Each one congratulating my parents for raising such a brilliant daughter. Sophia stood in the center of it all, basking in the glow. Her letter held high like a trophy. I was maybe 14 at the time. Sitting on the staircase watching from a distance, no one noticed I hadn't eaten dinner yet. Or that I had spent the afternoon helping my mom set up for the celebration. I wasn't resentful exactly, it just confirmed what I already understood. Sophia's victories belonged to everyone, while mine would always be private. Years later, when I won a scholarship for my own research program, I came home bursting with the kind of pride that doesn't happen often. I wanted to see their faces light up. Just once. The way they had for her. My mother was in the kitchen, folding laundry. When I told her, she gave me a distracted smile and said, "That's nice, sweetie," before turning back to her shirts. That was it. No calls to the relatives. No special dinner. No toast. Just 3 little words. And my accomplishment evaporated into the air like it barely existed. Birthdays carried the same pattern. Sophia's 16th was unforgettable. A shiny car wrapped with a red bow parked in the driveway. Relatives snapping photos. Neighbors stopping by to admire. When my 16th rolled around, I was handed a new backpack and a sensible pair of shoes. Useful things. Things I did need. But not the kind of gifts that made you feel celebrated. I smiled. I said thank you. And tried to ignore the sting in my chest. Even ordinary family dinners carried their own quiet hierarchies. We'd all sit around the table. The smell of roasted chicken, or my father's favorite stew filling the room. But the conversation always circled back to Sophia. What class she was excelling in. What friends she had made. What boy had asked her out. If I tried to share something about my day, the attention would drift. Forks clinking against plates, as if my words were background noise. Eventually, I stopped trying. I learned to nod, to smile, to listen while my own stories stayed locked inside. That was how I survived those years, by teaching myself not to expect recognition. I convinced myself that being quiet was easier. That fading into the background was a kind of strength. But underneath, something was hardening. Each overlooked achievement, each brushed-off moment, left a small mark. And by the time I reached adulthood, those marks had formed a pattern I couldn't unsee. Adulthood didn't magically change the balance of things. If anything, the gap only widened. Sophia became the star everyone expected her to be. At family gatherings, she was always introduced first. Her accomplishments recited like a resume, her thriving business, her travels, the designer clothes she wore. I was there too, usually standing just behind her, smiling politely while people praised her beauty or her ambition. Occasionally, someone would glance my way and add, "And Clara's so thoughtful, always willing to help." Thoughtful, helpful, words that sounded more like consolation prizes than recognition. I didn't resent Sophia for being who she was, but the way the world revolved around her made me feel like a shadow trailing her steps. Even when I succeeded at work, publishing a research paper or being invited to conferences, it didn't spark the same reaction at home. My news was often met with a distracted "good job" before the subject shifted back to Sophia's latest milestone. It was as if no matter how far I pushed myself, I would always land in second place. The pattern followed us right into her wedding. From the moment she announced her engagement, the family was buzzing with plans, and without even being asked, I became the quiet engine behind it all. I picked out flowers when Sophia couldn't decide between blush or ivory roses. I designed the invitations, making sure every word was perfect. I coordinated seating charts, spoke with caterers, and kept track of schedules. Every detail was carefully handled by me. And yet, it was presented as if it had magically come together on its own. When relatives praised how flawless the arrangements looked, Sophia beamed, taking the credit as though she had orchestrated everything. My parents, glowing with pride, nodded along. No one thought to mention me. No one thought to say thank you. To them, it was only natural that I would take care of things. That was my role, the quiet fixer in the background. Invisible until something went wrong. I told myself I didn't mind. That helping was my way of contributing. But the truth is, each unacknowledged effort left me emptier. There were nights I stayed up until dawn, ironing out last-minute issues, scrolling through spreadsheets and contracts while everyone else slept. On the morning of the wedding, when I should have been resting, I was still fussing over the placement of the centerpieces. Later that afternoon, I found myself kneeling in the reception hall, adjusting a row of chairs that had been set unevenly. The room was quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of lilies. My hands trembled slightly as I tugged a chair into place. Then another. I stepped back, checked the line, and bent down again to fix it. No one noticed. Guests passed by, chatting, sipping champagne, oblivious to the woman making sure they would sit comfortably. I stood there for a moment, dust clinging to the hem of my dress, and realized that once again, I had poured myself into something that would never be recognized. It wasn't bitterness that washed over me then, but a strange, hollow calm, because deep down, I already knew this wasn't about chairs, or flowers, or invitations. It was about the way I had been positioned my entire life, always in service, always in the background, always unseen. I had just finished straightening that last row of chairs when someone asked me to move mine. The reception hall was overflowing, and they needed space near the restroom for extra guests. I nodded automatically, as I always did, and found myself led to a small, metal folding chair tucked beside the bathroom door. It squeaked when I sat down, the seat cold and unwelcoming under the thin fabric of my dress. From where I sat, I couldn't even see the head table clearly. The music, the laughter, the glow of the chandeliers, all of it felt distant, like I was attending my own sister's wedding from the shadows. A faint draft slipped under the door each time someone entered or left the restroom. The scent of disinfectant mingled with the perfume and champagne. For a long moment, I simply stared at the plate in front of me. A salad already wilting at the edges, the dressing congealing, my fork hovered, then dropped soundlessly against the porcelain. It wasn't just the chair, or the bad view, or the lack of thought behind sending me there. It was the culmination of everything. Memories began rushing back, uninvited, unstoppable. Sophia's graduation party, where she received a standing ovation for getting into an Ivy League school, while my own acceptance into a research fellowship had been brushed off with a distracted smile. Birthday mornings where she unwrapped jewelry, designer handbags, expensive perfumes while I was handed practical items, things you'll actually use. The family dinners, where every story, every laugh, every moment of pride belonged to her. And I sat quietly, learning to swallow not just my food but my hurt. All those moments collided right there, beside the restroom. As I balanced on that wobbly folding chair, I felt my chest tighten, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out the chatter around me. My hands clenched into fists on my lap, and then, as clear as if someone had whispered it into my ear, I heard the words form in my own mind. This ends tonight. The thought startled me. For years, I had carried the weight of silence, the habit of obedience, the instinct to avoid making waves. But something cracked wide open in that instant. Sitting there in the most humiliating corner of the most important day of my sister's life, I finally saw the pattern laid bare. It wasn't just bad luck or small oversights. It was a design. A role I had been cast into since childhood, the invisible one. The supporting act. The reliable background. A wave of humiliation flushed through me, burning hot against my skin. But mixed with it was something sharper, brighter. Awakening. The sting of recognition. The undeniable realization that I had let myself become this by never saying no, by always smoothing things over, by allowing my worth to be defined in whispers instead of declarations. Tears welled, but I blinked them back. No one here deserved to see me cry. Not tonight. Not like this. I lifted my chin, pressing my back against the hard chair. For the first time in my life, I felt an edge of defiance pulsing inside me. The clinking of glasses drew my attention to the head table. Sophia was laughing, radiant in her gown, surrounded by admiration. People raised their glasses, toasting to her future, her happiness, her perfection. And I thought, how many times had I been the quiet one arranging the celebration so she could shine? How many nights had I sacrificed sleep, money, or energy, just to make sure everything went flawlessly for her? Without a word of thanks? Sitting there, I realized the cost. It wasn't just my time or my effort. It was my voice, my dignity, my very sense of self. Every compromise had chipped away at me until there was barely anything left. Until I was just a woman on a folding chair by the bathroom, forgotten at her own sister's wedding. Something inside me hardened. My humiliation turned into resolve. My shame transformed into clarity. I thought of the younger version of me. The girl who smiled through being overlooked. Who bit her tongue because keeping the peace seemed more important than being heard. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, you don't have to accept this. You don't have to stay silent. The decision came quietly but firmly. Like a door clicking shut. I was done being the invisible one. Done being the family's fixer. Done being Sophia's safety net. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, what I would say, how I would act, what kind of fallout it would cause. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would continue the same after tonight. As the music swelled and guests clinked their glasses again, I sat straighter. My palms flat against my knees. My heart was still pounding. But now it beat in rhythm with something larger than fear. It beat with determination. And though no one noticed me in that moment, though I was still, to their eyes, just the woman beside the bathroom on a folding chair, I knew inside myself that I had just taken the first step toward rewriting the story of my life. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I don't know how long I sat there after the thought solidified in my head. 5 minutes. Maybe 10, but at some point, the decision stopped being a whisper and became a command. My body knew it before my mind did. I pushed back the chair, the metal scraping against the floor with a sharp sound that caught a few eyes nearby. I stood. My knees trembled, but my spine stayed straight. My purse hung from the back of the chair, and I took it with one deliberate motion. There was no grand gesture. No storm of tears. No dramatic confrontation. Just me, deciding I was finished. I remember thinking, if I cry, they'll see weakness. If I shout, they'll say I'm jealous. But if I walk out quietly, they'll have no defense. They'll only have the memory of me choosing dignity over humiliation. The room felt suddenly smaller. The ceiling lower. The music seemed too loud. The laughter too shrill. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I began to move toward the exit, weaving between tables where strangers raised glasses of champagne, oblivious to what was unfolding right behind them. Halfway across the room, I noticed Elena, one of the bridesmaids, standing near the dessert table. She caught my eye. For a second, I considered looking away, but something inside me told me not to hide. So I met her gaze. She looked confused, almost concerned. As if she sensed the shift in the air, she took a small step toward me and whispered, "Clara, are you leaving?" I didn't answer. I just gave her the faintest nod, enough to make it clear that yes, I was. Her expression froze, then softened into something that felt like recognition. She didn't try to stop me. She simply watched, her hand pressing lightly against her bouquet, as though she knew this moment mattered more than keeping up appearances. And then the whispering began. I didn't have to turn my head to hear it ripple through the room. Clara just walked out. The words traveled from table to table, like a current running under the surface of the celebration. Conversations faltered. Glasses lowered. Even the band seemed to play a little more softly, as if the energy had shifted. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid of changing my mind, but because I knew that looking back would invite their pity, their judgment, or their confusion. I didn't want to see any of it. I pushed open the door and stepped into the cool night air. The muffled music followed me, then faded as the door closed behind me. For the first time all evening, I could breathe. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just a few cars lined up under the yellow glow of the street lamps. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, the adrenaline of the moment rushing through me like a storm. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might echo across the pavement. But beneath the trembling, beneath the fear of what this would mean, there was something else. A lightness. A release. I hadn't realized how much weight I had been carrying until I put it down in that single act of walking away. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. I stared at the windshield, watching my breath fog the glass. For years I had dreamed of being seen, of finally being acknowledged, and yet, the most powerful moment of my life had come when I chose invisibility on my own terms by leaving. By refusing to stay in a place that diminished me. Of course, fear lurked at the edges. I knew there would be fallout. Questions from relatives. Sharp remarks from my mother. Maybe even anger from Sophia herself. But for the first time, those possibilities didn't paralyze me. They felt survivable. Because I had survived this night. Because I had claimed something no one could take from me again. My pride. I finally turned the key and the engine hummed to life. The headlights cut across the asphalt, and I eased the car into gear. As I pulled away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The hall stood glowing behind me, full of noise and light. But it already felt like a place I had outgrown. Like an old photograph that belonged to someone else's story. The road ahead stretched out dark and quiet, lined with trees swaying gently in the breeze. I rolled down the window and let the night air rush in. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt a fragile kind of freedom pressing against my skin. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't security. But it was freedom. Driving home, I thought about the girl who had always stayed, always endured, always swallowed her own needs. I whispered aloud into the empty car, as if she could hear me. You don't have to anymore. En en second, thanks so for watching and like now. And Sesman, by the time I pulled into the driveway of my apartment, the fear had dulled into exhaustion. I locked the car, walked up the steps, and let myself inside. The silence of the space wrapped around me like a blanket. I leaned against the closed door, purse still dangling from my shoulder, and let out a long breath. My legs felt weak, but my spirit had never felt stronger. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, I knew one thing. I had walked away and I wasn't going back. The morning light felt too bright when it spilled through the blinds. My head ached. Not from alcohol but from the weight of everything I had carried the night before. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing, walking out. The hush that had followed me like a shadow, but instead of regret, what lingered was relief. I made coffee and sat on the couch with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the steam rising from the mug. The silence of my apartment was thick, almost sacred. It was the kind of silence you don't want to break, because breaking it means stepping back into the noise of other people's expectations. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the door. My stomach dropped. I already knew who it was. I opened it slowly. And there stood Sophia. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair neatly pinned back as though the wedding had never ended. But her eyes betrayed her. They were tired. Maybe even a little desperate. She held her clutch under her arm like a shield. "I'm sorry," she began. Her voice clipped but rehearsed. "But you walking out, it made the wedding look bad. I mean, there ones have remained sure but have not men." There it was. Not concern for me. Not curiosity about why her sister had left in the middle of her vows. But worry about the optics. Worry about appearances. Worry about the stain on her perfect image. I stepped aside and let her in. She perched on the edge of the chair like she was afraid to touch anything. I sat across from her, holding my coffee, steadying my breath. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She waited. Maybe hoping I'd apologize first. Maybe assuming I'd fold like I always had. But I didn't. Finally, I said quietly, "Do you even know why I left?" Her lips tightened. "Because you wanted attention. You've always hated when I'm in the spotlight. And there have to is now." The words stung. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I set my mug down and leaned forward. "No, Sophia. I left because I was done. Done pretending that your happiness has to come at the cost of my dignity. And there have to is now." Her eyes flickered, but she crossed her arms defensively. "You're being dramatic. We've not stay cree." And that's when something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't swallow it. I didn't back down. I let the truth out. Steady and sharp. Like I'd been storing it for years. "Do you know what it felt like growing up with you?" I asked. Always being the one who was too quiet, too plain, too invisible. Watching you get praised for everything: your looks, your charm, as your accomplishments, while I was the one cleaning up after your messes. Listening when you cried. Forgiving when you lied. I was the sister who absorbed everything you didn't want to deal with. And I thought that was love. But it wasn't. It was me being your doormat. And Bray. She shifted uncomfortably. But I kept going. My voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It was calm. But every word carried weight. When you borrowed money and never paid it back, I let it go. When you spread stories about me being the difficult one, I stayed silent. When Mom compared us and said she wished I could be more like you, I swallowed that pain so you wouldn't feel guilty. Year after year, I erased myself so you could shine brighter. And last night, sitting there while you celebrated a perfect life you built on the backs of everyone who bent for you, I realized I'm done. And as a reason, her face had gone pale. Her lips pressed tight. But I wasn't finished. "I will not be your doormat anymore," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Not for weddings. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. Not for anything. If you want to have a sister, then you'll have to treat me like one. If not, then you can keep your perfect image and your perfect life without me in it." Age stable. The room went silent. Sophia looked at me like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. Maybe for the first time in our lives. She couldn't dismiss me. I couldn't laugh it off. I couldn't twist it into something small. She opened her mouth. Then closed it again. Her hand clutched tighter. As though holding on to it would anchor her in the storm I had just unleashed. Finally, she whispered. I didn't know you felt that way. Into the everything of that, a bitter laugh escaped me. You didn't want to know. Into the everything of that, her eyes filled with something I hadn't expected, shame. Real. Raw shame. For once, she had no defense. No sharp retort. No deflection. Just silence. I stood, signaling that our conversation was over. You can go now. In Nets to Burton's. She hesitated. Like she wanted to reach out. Like she wanted to mend it. But instead, she rose slowly, her heels clicking against the floor. At the door, she turned back, her face pale and strained. I don't know what to say, she admitted softly. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Just start showing it. Or don't. That's your choice. In Nets to Burton's. And with that, she left. When the door closed, I leaned against it, my chest rising and falling with the weight of everything I had just released. For the first time in my life, I had told Sophia the truth. I had drawn a line. One she couldn't cross without consequences. The silence returned. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like space. Space I had finally claimed for myself. And in that space, for the first time, I felt something I'd been chasing for years. Not her approval, not her love, but my own strength. The day after Sophia left my apartment, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at a slip of paper. It was the business card of a therapist a coworker had once recommended. For months, I had tucked it away in a drawer, telling myself I didn't need it. That therapy was for people who were falling apart. But as I held it now, I realized I had been falling apart quietly for years. I had just learned how to do it politely. So I called. My voice trembled as I made the appointment. But when I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A decision that belonged to me. A week later, I sat in a softly lit office. The walls painted in muted earth tones. There was a small lamp that glowed warmly, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. I sat on a couch across from a woman with kind eyes, who introduced herself simply as Dr. Reynolds. For the first time, I remember thinking as I folded my hands in my lap, I chose to heal instead of just endure. It isn't lengths to that. At first, the words didn't come easily. I stumbled. I hesitated. Years of silence had trained me to hold things in, to filter everything I said so it wouldn't upset anyone else. But Dr. Reynolds was patient. She waited through my pauses, nodding gently, never rushing me. I told her about the wedding, about Sophia, about the years of being invisible, the countless small betrayals, the quiet ache of not being enough in my own family. As I spoke, my voice cracked but didn't break. The more I released, the lighter I felt. As if the weight I had carried all those years was finally being set down piece by piece. In those early sessions, I learned something I had never been taught growing up. Boundaries. Simple words that felt revolutionary. No. That's not okay. I can't do that right now. Each phrase was like trying on a new language. One that felt clumsy at first but slowly became more natural. Dr. Reynolds explained that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were doors I could open and close as I chose. They were a way of saying, my needs mattered too. That concept shook me. My needs had always felt like an afterthought. Something to be ignored for the sake of peace. I practiced in small ways. When a coworker asked me to cover a shift at the last minute, I took a deep breath and said, no, I can't. My heart raced afterward. But nothing terrible happened. The world didn't collapse. No one disowned me. Then I practiced with friends. When someone made a joke at my expense, I calmly said. That's not funny to me. My voice was steady, even when my hands shook. And slowly, each boundary I placed stitched together something inside me that had been torn for years, my self-respect. Therapy also forced me to face my own patterns. I realized how often I'd chosen silence over honesty, endurance over confrontation. It wasn't just Sophia who had walked over me, I had allowed it. Believing it was the only way to keep love. That truth hurt. But it also gave me power. If I had allowed it, I could also stop it. One evening, after a session, I went home, lit a candle, and sat quietly in the dim light of my living room. I whispered to myself, I matter. The words sounded foreign, almost foolish, but as they lingered in the air, I felt a swell of emotion rise in my chest. Tears streamed down my face. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were the tears of someone finally coming home to herself. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn anyone's approval. I wasn't rehearsing how to please or protect. I was learning to protect myself. Healing wasn't dramatic or fast. It wasn't some grand revelation. It was slow, steady, and sometimes uncomfortable. But each time I said, no. Each time I drew a line. Each time I gave myself permission to rest. I reclaimed a piece of the dignity I had lost. And as the weeks passed, I noticed something shift in the mirror. My reflection no longer looked like someone bracing for impact. My shoulders stood straighter. My eyes carried less fear. There was still work to do. But I had begun. And beginning was everything. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I heard a soft knock on my apartment door. For a moment, I froze. A familiar part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to avoid another storm I wasn't ready to face. But then I reminded myself, I had changed. I had been practicing boundaries. If Sophia had come to see me, I could choose how that conversation went. So I opened the door. Sophia stood there. Her posture different from the last time. She wasn't carrying the same air of entitlement. The unshakable confidence that had always filled the room before I even entered. She looked smaller somehow. Almost hesitant. Clara, she said softly. Can I come in? I nodded and led her to the living room. The silence between us was heavy. But not hostile, more like fragile glass that might break if we moved too fast. She was the first to speak. I know I hurt you, she said. Her eyes fixed on her hands. I've been replaying what you said the other day, and you're right. I never really saw you. I thought being the older sister meant leading. But maybe it just meant I was blind to what you needed. Too incongruous. I listened carefully, my heart pounding. A part of me wanted to accept her words immediately, to grasp at the hope of a repaired bond. But therapy had taught me not to abandon myself for peace. So I breathed, steadying my voice. Sophia, I began. We can only be sisters if there's respect. No more dismissing. No more pretending my feelings don't exist. If you can't honor that, then I can't do this anymore. It's not no pays to her Fafin Ariaski. Her eyes lifted to mine, glistening. For once, she didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She just let my words settle. After a long pause, she whispered, I don't want to lose you. I'll try. It's not no pays to her Fafin Ariaski. That was all I needed for now, not perfection. Not a sudden transformation. Just a willingness. We sat together for the first time as equals. Our conversation wasn't filled with forced jokes or the unspoken competition that had always lingered in the air. Instead, we talked like two women who had finally grown up. Like sisters learning who the other truly was beyond childhood roles and family expectations. I told her about therapy. About the boundaries I was setting. She admitted she didn't understand all of it yet. But she wanted to. She asked questions. And for once, her curiosity didn't feel like judgment. It felt like care, of course. There was caution in my heart. Forgiveness doesn't erase years of pain overnight. Trust takes time to rebuild. But as we sat there, sipping tea in the fading afternoon light, I felt something I hadn't felt with her in years. Hope. When she stood to leave, she hugged me. Not the hurried, distracted kind of hug she used to give, but one that lingered just a little longer, as if she didn't want to let go. After she left, I sat quietly, reflecting. Our bond was still delicate, like new roots breaking through the soil, but it was alive. And maybe that was enough for now. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that we could create a relationship not built on shadows or hierarchy, but on mutual respect. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. And, in that possibility, I found something precious, something that made all the pain worth enduring, the fragile, shimmering hope that family could change. It was a bright morning in late spring when I finally felt the air shift. The kind of morning where the sky looked endless, painted in soft blues with streaks of white clouds drifting lazily. I decided to take a walk in the park near my apartment, a place I had visited many times but never with the same kind of peace that now guided my steps. For years, those walks had been filled with restless thoughts, the heavy weight of comparison, the constant echo of my sister's name in every corner of my mind. Even when she wasn't there, I carried her shadow like an anchor. But this time, something was different. I wasn't walking to escape, or to sort through the pain. I was simply walking because I wanted to. I noticed the little things I used to overlook. Children chasing each other by the swings, their laughter carried on the breeze, an older couple sharing a bench, quietly holding hands, as if they had all the time in the world, a dog racing through the grass, tongue out, joy written in every movement. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I was part of it, part of the living, breathing rhythm of a world that no longer judged me by my sister's shadow. I smiled without forcing it. The kind of smile that rises slowly from the inside and doesn't need anyone's approval to stay. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even pride. It was freedom. The truth was, I no longer needed to prove myself to my parents, to my sister, or to anyone else. I had learned the hardest lesson, that my worth had always existed, even when others refused to see it. And now, I finally believed it. I thought back to that confrontation with Sophia, to her attempt at humility, to the fragile hope that maybe we could start again. But even if she never truly changed, even if the relationship stayed fragile or eventually faded, I knew I would be okay, because my peace didn't depend on her anymore. My happiness wasn't tied to her validation. As I walked beneath the trees, sunlight breaking through the branches and warming my face, I whispered to myself, I'm free. And I meant it. Clara no longer lived in her sister's shadow. She had finally found freedom. And to anyone listening to my story, I want to leave you with this. Family can shape us. Family can wound us. But none of us are destined to remain trapped in the roles we were given as children. We all have the right to step into the light, to claim our own space, to be more than what others expected of us. Freedom isn't something someone else can give, it's something we choose. One brave step at a time. That morning in the park, I chose it. And I have never looked back.